Christina. Building an inclusive organization. Leveraging the power of a diverse workforce. Narrated by Marston York and Morag Sims.
Diversity and inclusion are the latest buzzwords touted by every corporation. But what do they really mean? And how do you get past the slogans and put them into practice in your company? Too often, companies treat diversity as a box-ticking exercise, what the authors call Diversity 101. They thrust people of colour into token positions, or begrudgingly appoint a woman onto the board and proclaim themselves diverse. But if the decision-making is still made almost entirely by homogenous teams of white men, this diversity is merely surface window dressing. Leaders need to see a lack of diversity and inclusion as a crisis for the intrinsic culture of the company, to be assailed at the highest levels. Instead of expecting minorities to assimilate to the existing company culture, the company culture needs to make structural interventions to become truly inclusive. Companies that integrate diversity and inclusion policies throughout the organization are more creative and innovative, have more engaged employees, and even earn more money. Equality is a win for everyone.
Blink 1 of 8.
We've all done it. We've clicked unfollow or unfriend on that family member who insists on spouting political beliefs we find abhorrent. Or that friend who posts tasteless Facebook memes that make our blood boil. Such an easy solution. With a simple click, you never have to hear their awful theories on the world again. And why not? Why should you be forced to listen to things that enrage you? Well, the problem is that unfriending your racist uncle doesn't make him less racist. And now, he doesn't have anyone to contradict him, allowing his racist views to go unchallenged.
The key message here is, in increasingly polarized times, diversity in the workplace is more important than ever.
Diversity in its essence is about engaging with different perspectives. But in recent years, we've become increasingly polarized, existing within homogenous silos of people sharing the same identity and opinions. Politically, this drive has resulted in the once unthinkable. The UK leaving the European Union and the US electing a president who openly derides refugees and immigrants, and who built a platform based on their exclusion from the country at all costs. Social media makes this polarization far worse, with technology optimizing your online experience using cookies to track your tastes and interests, and reflecting them back to you in the content you see. Before the internet, people used to consume news from a handful of newspapers and TV channels. Today, they're informed about the world via a personalized feed, so they're rarely confronted with contradictory opinions. Worse still, many sources are overtly biased or even completely fabricated. Our lives are made poorer by homogeneity. In the workplace, any completely white male team has deeply entrenched blind spots and is prone to groupthink. They produce fewer original ideas and are ill-prepared for the future. Worst of all, these environments often lead to cronyism, with gender pay disparities and nepotism strangling growth and scaring away fresh talent. In these politically intolerant times, corporations bear responsibility to take a leading role in creating genuinely diverse and inclusive workplaces, where employees can learn from each other and bring their whole selves to work. How can corporations learn to transform homogenous cultures? As we'll learn in the next Blink, it starts by confronting unconscious bias.
Blink 2 of 8.
Researchers from Princeton University conducted an experiment in which participants were shown 2 photographs. They were asked to decide which of the subjects looked more competent. Unbeknownst to the participants, these photos were of 2 candidates in a US congressional election. Sure enough, the candidate that the participants had decided looked more competent was indeed more successful, and won their races around 70% of the time. But what makes someone look competent? Their clothes? Their ease before the camera? We make these kinds of superficial judgments about people all the time. This is called unconscious bias, which means we have judgments and beliefs that shape how we think and interpret information.
The key message here is, we must confront unconscious bias to transform our workplaces.
Unconscious bias is dangerous because it's invisible. For example, if you have an internalized belief that women are less powerful leaders, you'll filter everything a woman says through that bias, but you won't even realize you're doing it. Instead, you'll think it's just an objective fact that the candidate you saw didn't have what it takes to lead the company. While it may be true, the fact is you never gave her a real chance. You made your mind up before she even entered the room. It doesn't take a lot of imagination to work out how much unconscious bias affects candidates from underrepresented groups in the workplace. They're less likely to get interviewed, or hired, or promoted within a company. So, what can you do about it? The first step is acceptance. Declarations like, "I don't see colour," just mask the problem. Once you accept that you have blind spots, you can start to climb what Noel Birch describes as the ladder of cultural competence. You'll start out as unconsciously incompetent, and then progress to consciously competent. This is a challenging phase. You realize that you have deeply ingrained biases, but you have no idea what to do about them. By learning new skills and changing your behaviors, you'll move to the next stage, conscious competence. By now, you're constantly implementing strategies to counteract your biases. For example, if you're a recruiter who hires mostly white candidates, you can start doing an anonymized selection process and make sure you have a diverse hiring committee. Once these practices become second nature, you'll have moved to the final stage, unconscious competence. By now, you've become so intimate with your own internalized prejudices and how to deal with them that they no longer affect your performance at work.
Blink 3 of 8.
In 2017, 45 top female performers wrote to BBC director Tony Hall to complain about the gender pay gap. Notably, not one male performer had signed the letter. It was seen as being a female issue or a feminist issue, and so was left for women to fight, without any participation from the men who were benefiting from the pay disparity.
The key message here is, men need to start worrying about the gender pay gap.
This apathy has to change. The gender pay gap, GPG, is not a niche issue that can be sidelined by those in charge. It taps right into the culture of a company. Is there transparency about how and what people are paid? Are people promoted on merit or as a result of nepotism and tradition? Is there room for innovation? Any employee of whichever gender who cares about these principles should be deeply concerned when corrupt, opaque payment practices are allowed to flourish. While there's much talk about gender equality, the cold hard reality reveals that there is little political will to actually shrink the pay gap. For example, the authors did a study of the organizations heralded by The Times as being the top 50 employers for women in 2017. They found that only 6% of the companies on the list had a better than average record for equal pay. So, gender equality in most of these companies was more about a successful PR strategy than true equality for women in their employ. To effect real change, companies will have to adopt policies that embrace transparency. For example, many companies have started publishing all the salaries of their staff. This is a big incentive to level pay disparities. Furthermore, it gives all employees the information they need to negotiate for promotions and pay rises. Until the men in charge start seeing the gender pay gap as an urgent issue for them, gender equity will remain performative. This will affect not only the employees who are underpaid for doing the same work, but the well-being of the company as a whole. They won't be able to attract the best talent, and the culture of secrecy will discourage their current employees.
Blink 4 of 8.
It's a tradition in the famous Tour de France cycle race to give both the first and last cyclist to cross the finish line an award. While the winner is given a yellow jersey, the loser is given a red lantern in recognition that they were lighting the way from behind. It's easy to see the winners' strengths. They were fast and nimble and demonstrated their sporting prowess. It's much harder to see the value of the losing cyclist. But the loser demonstrated different qualities that are no less important, such as perseverance, stamina, and determination. As a team, the winning and losing cyclists complement each other, each bringing different strengths to the table.
The key message here is, Homogeneous workplaces are bad for business.
In our modern workplaces, we must prioritize creating teams based on difference instead of homogeneity. While the tendency is to look for candidates who are a good fit for an existing team, it can in fact be more productive to look for someone who brings something new, even if that adds friction to the team. This could be people of different races, genders, or socioeconomic backgrounds, but also those with different skills and temperaments. While introverts are often discriminated against in the hiring process, for example, they can be a valuable asset when everyone is shouting over one another. Valuing diversity is about recognizing the importance of having different voices at the table and doing everything necessary to create a company culture that allows them to bring their full selves to work. If leadership doesn't manage to create that inclusive environment, they risk not only a failure in representation, but a market failure as well. That's because having diverse teams is good for business. Studies by McKinsey and Company show that companies that fall into the top 25% in terms of gender diversity are 15% more likely to generate above average earnings. That number soars to 30% for ethnic diversity. Why is that? Well, companies that actively prioritize inclusion have greater employee engagement across the board. They're also more innovative. Diverse teams are much less inclined toward groupthink. Their ideas are more original because they challenge each other. Because they don't share the same prejudices and blind spots, these teams are better able to spot each other's mistakes and anticipate future risks to the company. So how can leaders make workplaces more inclusive in practice? We'll look at strategies in the next blink.
Blink 5 of 8.
One of the authors, Rafi Karim Alidina, always dresses up and makes sure to smile at security when he's walking through an airport. That's because he knows that as a Muslim man, people will subconsciously associate him with being a threat or a terrorist. The New York Times columnist Brent Staples has taken to whistling Vivaldi when he walks home at night because he noticed that his very presence on the street frightened the white people he encountered. By whistling white music, he puts them at ease. Both men are very familiar with minority stress, the experience of constantly trying to fit in with the dominant culture and reassure everyone else they pose no threat. Efforts towards improving diversity in the workplace are usually aimed at trying to help minority employees assimilate more seamlessly by, for instance, offering them workshops. But this doesn't solve the problem. In fact, minorities already know how to adapt. They do it all the time. The people who need to work at it are men, specifically the white men who lead companies and therefore play such a disproportionate role in creating the company culture.
The key message here is, inclusive leadership starts with gathering data.
Creating truly inclusive organizations means changing the culture of the organization from top down. So how can business leaders achieve this? Well, first, they need to try to understand how their employees actually feel about working in their organization. Do they feel that their ideas are heard and respected? That they're given credit for their work? That they have opportunities to grow professionally? Gathering this information can help organizations create an inclusion diagnostic that uncovers which behaviors help and which ones hinder employees' perceptions of inclusion in the workplace. After they've taken the time to engage with their employees and listen to their opinions, leaders need to evaluate diversity in their companies as it currently stands. What percentage of the company is white, and heterosexual, and able-bodied? What perspectives are missing? They will need to comprehensively re-evaluate the hiring process and scrutinize how promotions are awarded and salaries assigned. Once this research is compiled, workplace leaders can proactively target solutions that will make their workplaces more inclusive. These actions will differ according to the specific needs of the minority group. While LGBTQ+ employees say that representation by other LGBTQ+ employees during the recruitment process is important, disabled employees report that flexible work hours and accommodations for physical limitations are vital for ensuring career advancement.
Blink 6 of 8.
These days, unconscious bias workshops are ubiquitous. While this heightened awareness is great, studies have shown that knowing you're biased isn't enough to change your behavior. In fact, it could have the opposite effect. People may become complacent after attending training and fail to interrogate their deeply entrenched biases. To really change the culture of a company, you have to go beyond awareness and focus on concrete actions. These actions shouldn't be sporadic and individualized, but rather embedded in the daily functioning of the company.
The key message here is, transformation happens through action. Culture is something you do.
For example, you can change your hiring processes. Instead of advertising in the same few channels, you could post additional job ads on LGBTQ+ sites or at universities with whom you wouldn't normally advertise. To work against your internalized prejudices, you should review the applications with a panel and create structured interview questions that are the same for each candidate. Hiring diverse candidates is one thing. Making them feel respected enough to stay is another. If the company doesn't demonstrate that they are walking their talk, they won't be able to retain their hires. The key is creating a workplace that promotes psychological safety too, so that people know they're genuinely free to express their views and perspectives. Meeting spaces are notoriously unequal. Women and people from minority groups are much more likely to be interrupted or talked over. To counter this dynamic, you can create new policies about what kinds of language and behavior is appropriate for meetings, and rotate the meeting chair to make sure that those often silent team members will have a chance to take the lead. You could also appoint a rotating devil's advocate, tasked with asking difficult questions and challenging the group. Other interventions to practice inclusion at work include creating a mentorship program for minority employees that outlines a clear pathway to promotion and making work-from-home options available by default. Most importantly, these interventions need to involve the whole company. Changing a company culture is hard work and will take a long time. Therefore, it's essential that leaders have buy-in from the board, management, and employees. They will also need to create a clear plan for who does what, ensure there's clear communication between stakeholders, and build in a review process to create accountability.
Blink 7 of 8.
British comedian Lenny Henry was knighted by the Queen. But on ITV News, another black man was seen accepting the award. They'd played the wrong footage. This blunder is indicative of the fact that TV news crews are often almost entirely white. In this instance, they didn't have the cultural competence to realize that they weren't actually showing footage of Lenny Henry. When we look closely at specific industries, we see how destructive it is that they are largely white and culturally homogenous. We also discover how different industries mount different obstacles to becoming diverse and inclusive.
The key message here is, diversity and inclusion policies should be tailored to specific industries.
For example, cultural industries are hard to transform, in part because they rely so much on freelancers who are often hired chaotically and in haste. This makes standardizing the recruitment process difficult. What's more, these industries are rife with patronage. Many prefer to hire their friends or those with whom they've previously worked. The creative industries are also notoriously averse to censorship and oversight. To reach TV executives and other industry leaders, the authors had to create a program that would be seen as enabling creativity instead of impeding it. They worked with the executives to uncover why there was so little black representation both in writing rooms and on screen, and help them understand that homogeneous teams actually hampered the innovation of their programming. When working with academics, the authors take an entirely different approach. Many universities are hundreds of years old, and part of their status lies in the fact that they reaffirm archaic rituals and strict hierarchies. They're also some of the most racially homogeneous work environments around. In 2015, only 6.6% of staff at the Harvard Kennedy School were African American. Members of minority groups experience discrimination at every step of their academic journey, from admissions to the awarding of funding or scholarships, to getting published in peer-reviewed journals. So, how do you transform institutions with such entrenched histories of discrimination? The upside is that universities are also places of experimentation, with funding that's not directly tied to commercial success. The authors urged their clients to apply innovative thinking to the problem of discrimination. For example, by creating courses on intercultural competence, as NYU Abu Dhabi has done, or designing new ways to assess diversity in the workplace, as the authors did when they created the inclusion diagnostic together with Welcome. They also worked with universities to increase transparency and accountability, for example, by encouraging signed, public commitments to increase funding for women in science.
Blink 8 of 8.
Try typing 3 black teenagers into Google Images. You'll be greeted with row upon row of mugshots. Do the same for 3 white teenagers, and you'll see image after image of sporty young people. While technology is often heralded as a utopian solution to countless problems, this example shows that it's not free of bias. An investigation by ProPublica revealed that an algorithm, Compass, used to try and predict whether those previously convicted of crimes would reoffend, was twice as likely to incorrectly suggest a black person would reoffend as their white counterparts. Technology is created by people who embed their own racism and biases into the programs they create. It further exemplifies the urgent necessity to tackle diversity in the workplace.
The key message here is, the tech industry has the power to lead the way on diversity and inclusion.
For many years, big tech companies have claimed that they are so white because minorities simply don't have the skills and education necessary for employment, blaming a pipeline problem. To counteract this, companies like Facebook and Microsoft invested heavily in scholarships and educational opportunities to prepare women and minorities for tech jobs. The success of initiatives like Women Who Code has had the further benefit of humanizing the field. But there is far more than a pipeline problem going on. Statistics reveal that a lot more minorities hold degrees in, for example, computer science than have jobs in the field. There is supply, but this isn't reflected in the hiring process. To really address this issue, tech industry leaders must take a long, hard look at their own unconscious bias. They will need to apply some of the disruptive, innovative thinking that the industry is known for to one of its biggest failures, making workplaces more diverse. Initiatives like Textio and NotX are doing just that. Textio is a platform that screens job ads and flags part of the job description which might discourage marginalized groups from applying. The NotX program helps to combat bias in hiring by automatically anonymizing job applications. These initiatives have the potential to transform not only the tech industry, but wider policies and practices on diversity and inclusion in sectors like finance. Indeed, in most of our technology-driven industries and corporations.
You've just listened to our links to Building an Inclusive Organization by Stephen Frost and Rafi Karim Alidina.
The key message in these blinks is that diverse organizations think more innovatively, are more engaged, and even make more money. To achieve truly inclusive teams, policy changes have to be enacted by leadership across all levels of the organization. We must reframe diversity as a problem the majority have to tackle, and not the minority. Here's some actionable advice. Make diversity and inclusion personal. Words like diversity don't mean much when they're used in a very general way. If you really want to get buy-in from your organization, you're going to have to get personal. Ask your team members about the last time they'd been made to feel excluded or like they didn't belong. Tapping into those vulnerable experiences will help those in the majority have empathy for what minority groups experience in the workplace.
Do you have some feedback for us? Because if you do, then we would love to hear what you think about our content. So just drop us an email to remember@blinkist.com with Building an Inclusive Organization as the subject line, and let us know your thoughts.